In a 50-block backwater in downtown Brooklyn, once served by ferry from Manhattan, survives a great relic of New York's past. Nothing earth-shaking ever happened here, yet this beautiful, quiet, and much beloved urban neighborhood has survived 200 years of relentless city changes. It has prevailed over surrounding development pressures. It has lived on and thrived. Its population of some 22,000 people live happily surrounded by the country's largest ensemble of pre-Civil War houses. There must be a secret to this amazing story of survival. Brooklyn Heights is no accident of history. A desirable home site from its very beginning, it was declared New York's first suburb just before the Civil War. Walt Whitman thought its housing was just right for the comfort and lifestyle of middle-class people. He said it couldn't be matched anywhere. But with the coming of the Brooklyn Bridge, and as the city's growth exploded, change was on its way. By the turn of the 19th century, signs of urban pressure began to be felt. Elegant homes in a crowded city were becoming dated and impractical. Apartment buildings were beginning to replace private houses. New subway lines were opening up the area to greater numbers. Long-established families began to move to greener suburban pastures in the far reaches of Brooklyn and beyond. In 1910, it was reported that as many as half the homes had become rooming houses. The Heights had begun a long real estate slump, leaving it less and less family-friendly and more of a popular dormitory for transients. But the elements of an exceptionally attractive neighborhood were always there. Carson McCullers, one of the many creative people like Arthur Miller and Truman Capote who had found their way to this part of Brooklyn, described her feelings about the Heights in Vogue magazine. She said it had a quietness and sense of permanence that belonged to an earlier time. She wrote, "It was strange in New York to find yourself living in a real neighborhood. Even Hollywood noticed its special appeal." And then a new population of young families began settling in. They were determined to reclaim the intrinsic values of this well-located, old-time neighborhood. Its special qualities struck a bell in the 1950s for those who rejected white picket fence suburbia in favor of living in the center of the city. As the 1950s came to an end, the community of Brooklyn Heights was busy rebuilding the wonderful Greek Revival houses which had fallen into decay. It turned out that these 4- and 5-story townhouses lent themselves perfectly to modernization. Better still, the new owners could easily find room for a tenant or two, or even more, to help pay the cost of urban pioneering. But once again, the pressure of urban development and, worse, on a massive scale, government-sponsored slum clearance threatened this vision of a new urban future. So one night in late 1958, a group of concerned longtime residents and new settlers gathered in the study of the Unitarian Church on Pierpont Street. They founded what came to be known as KIC, the Community Conservation and Improvement Council. KIC was soon absorbed by the prestigious and well-established Brooklyn Heights Association. Together, the unified group pressed a 3-sided fight for more middle-income housing, for an improved public school, which had to wait 40 more years for major change, and, most innovative of all, a move for the permanent protection of its special architectural character. Taking on Robert Moses and the housing issue in 1959 eventually led to major changes in the original slum clearance plan. The plan called for a multi-block luxury rental building at Cadman Plaza. After 3 years of head-to-head battling, a much modified plan for cooperative, middle-income, family-oriented housing was adopted. And then the way was clear for the neighborhood's landmark battle for historic preservation. The 6-year struggle for historic preservation was launched in April 1959 at the distinguished Bossert Hotel. The hotel had seen better days, but its main ballroom was filled by an aroused community. They were ready to take on the city. Schools and slum clearance had been on the agenda, but the spotlight fell on preserving the entire neighborhood's unique assemblage of 19th century architecture. The Brooklyn Heights Press was to play it up big. Under the banner of the respected Brooklyn Heights Association, the groundbreaking fight for historic preservation had finally taken shape. Otis Pearsall, a young Wall Street lawyer, had dedicated himself to finding the legal keys to making preservation a reality. Pearsall had uncovered a previously unused but crucially important state law providing for the protection of historic buildings and places. It was named after Albert S. Bard, a longtime pioneer in the historic preservation movement. The law had been on the books since 1956 and had yet to be used, but it proved to be the main legal opening the Heights was looking for. Although the special quality of the neighborhood's buildings was familiar to everyone, they had never been systematically recorded and documented. So, assembling the needed information became priority number 1. By good fortune, a distinguished architectural historian named Clay Lancaster lived in the Heights. He was successfully encouraged to write the very first scholarly study of the hundreds of pre-Civil War houses and other early buildings. His book was published in miraculous short time and became one more powerful argument for preservation. Meanwhile, to further bolster the case, volunteer teams of architects had begun work on large, colorful maps showing virtually every structure in the 50-block neighborhood. These too proved to be valuable tools in persuading the city politic that the Heights did indeed merit historic designation. The preservation idea had begun to catch on. The outstanding work of the Brooklyn Heights Press had set the stage. The New York Times noticed all the action and described the project accurately, writing, "A new generation of Brooklyn Heights residents is trying to get the city to act under a never-invoked state law to preserve the architectural charm and family life advantages of the community." The message had been sent. That was 1959, and the historic Heights was in jeopardy. It would take almost 6 more years to make it all happen. During that period, some brownstones were lost to modern construction. Green gardens became conventional apartment buildings. Misguided improvements scarred the fronts of pre-Civil War houses. But with community awareness at a peak, the destruction and loss of its unique architectural features was held to a minimum. Along the way, it took serious community action at City Hall to set in motion the complex preservation gears. Finally, in 1965, the powerful legal entity and administrative system needed to throw a protective net over an entire neighborhood was signed into law. The remarkable thing about the Brooklyn Heights community was its persistent, enthusiastic support for this form of quality of life protection. And what had become a first for New York City proved to be a model for many other like-minded neighborhoods. In fact, by 2010, there were exactly 100 historic districts in New York, with still more in the pipeline. Pioneered by the successful Battle for Brooklyn Heights, this vast network of attractive, protected neighborhoods provides New Yorkers every day with a fresh sense of history and a comforting contribution to the city's way of life.